Part 1. The exterior. Our body is our glory, our hazard and our care. Martha Graham. St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians tells us to keep under the body, and bring it into subjection. The Stoic tradition was about endurance, a frugal diet, and modest use of other material possessions. This is not about six-pack abs but about developing the fortitude required for the path we have chosen. Lou Gehrig played in 2,130 consecutive games for the New York Yankees. He was an iron horse of a man who refused to quit. Gehrig's career batting average was an unbelievable .340, which he topped only when it counted, hitting .361 in his postseason career. Born to German immigrants in New York in 1903, Gehrig was the only one of 4 children to survive infancy. Gehrig's father was a drinker, and a bit of a layabout. His mother provided an incredible example of a quiet, indefatigable work ethic. "I am a slave to baseball," Gehrig said. Nobody cared more about conditioning, and nobody loved the game more. When you love the work, you don't cheat it or the demands it asks of you. That was true then, as it is now, even at the elite level. Gehrig was not superhuman, he had the same voice in his head that all of us do. Lou Gehrig's biographer says he had a driving, non-stop ambition to become a great ball player. Errol Louis, Gehrig's temperance was an interior force, emanating from deep within his soul. He knew that getting comfortable was the enemy, and chose to be in control. Lou kept his body in check, and his ego in check. The team always came first. Lou Gehrig wore his fame lightly, an observer once noted, but took the obligations of it seriously. Nobody plays that many games in a row without being a tough son of a bitch. Even his trainer once complained, in jest, there wouldn't be any job for trainers on ball clubs. He hit .329 with 9 home runs and 38 RBIs. There was no finer man that walked the earth, one of his teammates observed. His sheer will kept him together to a degree that few suspected anything was wrong. In 1939, Lou Gehrig told Joe McCarthy, "I guess that time has come to quit." It would be nearly a full additional season before Gehrig's body fully gave out. At the end of his career, all Gehrig could do was exit with the poise and control he had played with. On July 4, 1939, he entered Yankee Stadium for the final time in uniform. Stripped now of the muscles that had long served him, all that was left was the man himself. His teammates watched in silence as the Iron Horse broke down and wept. The body is a metaphor, a training ground, a proving ground for the mind and the soul. Like Lou Gehrig, each of us is in a battle with our physical form. Most of us don't have millions of fans watching us, or millions of dollars incentivizing us. Attack the Dawn. In the beginning of her career, Toni Morrison was a single working mother of 2 young boys. She struggled as one of the few black women in an incredibly white, male industry. In her mind, this was the height of life for her. Van Morrison's The Bluest Hour was published in 1970 and won her a National Book Award, a Nobel Prize, and a Presidential Medal. She followed it with 10 more novels, 9 non-fiction works, 5 children's books, 2 plays, and short stories. Is that why quiet mornings seem so holy? Perhaps it's that we're tapping into the traditions of our ancestors who rose early to pray, to farm, to fetch water from the river. The strenuous life is the best life. King George IV was a notorious glutton. His breakfast consisted of 2 pigeons, 3 steaks, a near full bottle of wine, and a glass of brandy. In time, he grew so fat he could no longer sleep lying down or the weight of his own chest might asphyxiate him. Bob Greene, what could Babe Ruth have achieved had he been more disciplined? He says self-discipline is not a rejection of pleasure but a way to embrace it. Greene, Theodore Roosevelt remade his life and, in a sense, the world through exercise. Nearly half of young Americans are ineligible to join the U.S. military for health or fitness reasons. A healthy diet, and not abusing drugs or drink, does much of the heavy lifting. The Stoic Musonius Rufus explained that a philosopher's body should be well prepared for physical activity. You can choose the means, but the method is a must. You must be active. Treat the body rigorously, as Seneca tells us, so that it may not be disobedient to the mind. As you're building muscle, you're also building willpower and strength. Quit being a slave. In 1949, Dwight Eisenhower quit smoking after battling a 38-year habit. Few figures in public life have had Dwight D. Eisenhower's willpower, biographer Gene Edward Smith wrote. Who can be free when they have lost the freedom to abstain? Seneca argued that even slave owners were chained to the responsibilities of slavery. Eisenhower's habit was killing him, as many of ours are too, slowly, imperceptibly. Why should we take orders from our belly or crotches? Neither can the body be in charge of us. Whatever the bad habit is, whatever seems to be ruling your life, socially acceptable or not, you have to quit. Just because you started, doesn't mean you have to continue. What counts is what we do about it today that we choose to stop being a slave. Avoid the superfluous. Frida Gitas, Cato the Elder lived austerely, rejecting trappings of high society. She says frugality was not deprivation, it was independence. When we overextend ourselves, when we chase, we are not self-sufficient, she says. When you strip away the unnecessary and excessive, what's left is you. How will you know if something is superfluous? One indication can be how hard other people are pushing it on you. Think about how content you were with less just a few years ago. Clean up your desk. Robert Moses was New York City's longest-serving mayor, serving from 1924 to 1968. He is credited with building 2,567,256 acres of parkland, 658 playgrounds, 416 miles of parkways, 13 bridges, tunnels, stadiums, civic centers, exhibition halls. If we want to think well and work well, it doesn't start with the mind. The session in the weight room goes better when the dumbbells are in the right place. The craftsman is safer when the workshop is tidy. Meetings run tighter when the conference room is fresh and sparse. A person comfortable with a messy workspace will become comfortable with sloppy work. A person who doesn't eliminate noise will miss the messages from the muses. As the novelist Gustave Flaubert commands, be regular and orderly in your life, so that you may be violent and original in your work. Just show up. Show up and try. Get on the treadmill. Pick up the violin. Script out some scenes. Lift a couple of weights. Jog 1 mile. Chase down a lead. Once you get started, momentum can grow. When you show up, you can get lucky. Lou Gehrig's success was rooted in the fact that he didn't miss many days of work. He had to push through ennui, doubt, and just plain not feeling it. You cannot be great without the self-discipline to show up every day. Sweat the small stuff. In basketball, footwear is incredibly important. An improperly worn shoe can lead to a blister, an infection, favoring a foot, or going up for a rebound wrong. We're fit to tackle the big problems only if we do the little things right first. The devil is in the details, the great Admiral Hyman Rickover used to say, but so is salvation. Fitzgerald lamented, it is the loose ends with which men hang themselves. Hustle, hustle, hustle. In the American Civil War, General George McClellan seemed utterly incapable of getting to the fight quickly. Only after repeated prods from President Lincoln did he finally move against Lee. McClellan was a brilliant soldier, but groaning under the weight of his baggage train. Manny Machado, I'm not the type of player that's going to be Johnny Hustle, Machado said after being thrown out half jogging after hitting a ball deep in the hole. A great player shouldn't need to be reminded of this, it should be in their blood. Mike Downey, few of us hustle as much as Mike McClellan, Manny Machado, or Napoleon Bonaparte. Not hustling ain't going to sell where we play baseball, says owner of the Atlanta Braves. Hustle because you never know when it might be your last try, he says. Slow down, to go faster. When Octavian took over Rome, it was a city of bricks. He was proud, he said, to leave it a grand empire of marble. It took time, it took getting a lot of small things right, but it was worth it. The person who rushes is, in the end, not very efficient. During the Civil War, General Ulysses S. Grant criticized General George Thomas for not moving fast enough against General Hood's army at Nashville. Thomas moved slowly only because he was first getting everything right, and then attacked with all deliberate speed. It is too simple to say that one must hustle always. Old Slow Trot was a rock. One that, once it got rolling, nothing could block, says poet Juan Ramon Jimenez. Hustle isn't always about hurrying, it is about getting things done, properly. It's okay to move slowly, provided you never stop. Practice, then practice more. Octavian's teacher Arius Didymus said, practice over a long time turns into second nature. For a samurai, there was no such thing as pretty good. When you are not practicing, refining, working, someone else is. And when you meet them, they will beat you. The cellist Pablo Casals believed he was still making progress. Florence Nightingale wanted young nurses to understand nursing was an art that required as hard a preparation as any painter or sculptor's work. Winston Churchill spent many evenings practicing his impromptu performances. Just work. Joyce Carol Oates' first book, With Shuddering Fall, was released in 1964. By the 1980s, she was up to 19 books. Even into her 80s, she is still working. If asked how many books she'd written, she'd probably undercount. She says it can be torture, but if you do it right, it's also torture not to do it. Oates, when you find what you're meant to do, you just do it. Birds, damn it, birds, she would later yell at students who didn't give their full commitment. Dress for success. In 1990, Angela Merkel entered politics, emerging from behind the Berlin Wall in the insular world of academia. Suddenly, all sorts of attention was paid to how she looked, much to Merkel's surprise. When one political advisor attempted to encourage her to improve her style, Merkel was mortified. How we dress and style ourselves is one of those tricky edge cases that make temperance difficult to pinpoint. A person who is sloppy and slovenly can hardly be said to be self-disciplined. But those who value the superficial over the substantive are equally off track. Joe McCarthy banned shaving in locker rooms for athletes. He demanded they show up shaven and ready to get to work. There can be something about cleaning up, too, that puts us in the right headspace. Cleanliness instills order and cleanliness in a messy situation. Seek discomfort. He wanted to make it clear to himself that was perfectly possible and normal to endure. This practice came in handy for Seneca, as he tried to escape from Emperor Nero's clutches. Seneca wrote that Seneca was no Cato day to day, but he knew from his practice that he could be if he had to. Gandhi got used to getting by on little. Being hungry or cold. Later, when they threw him in jail, like Reuben Carter, he was ready. Self-discipline begins with the body, but it doesn't just magically happen. The best of us become the best by undergoing the same challenges. Take the cold bath bravely, W.B. Du Bois wrote to his daughter. Temperance now, in times of plenty, because plenty never lasts. Manage the load. Greg Popovich's decision to rest 4 of his best players during a nationally televised game was controversial. It cost him $250,000, but it got him 2 more division titles and his 5th championship. It also changed the NBA and all of sports. Self-discipline is a short-term bargain with long-term consequences. John Steinbeck referred to this as the indiscipline of overwork, reminding himself that it was the falsest of economies. Teams that peaked too early, career-ending injuries and books that were rushed. Forrestal was America's first Secretary of Defense, tasked with unifying the armed forces into a single department. Those who observed him could see the toll the job took on him, on his marriage, on anything resembling a life outside the office. He was clearly depressed, clearly unsatisfied, clearly struggling, but he pushed on. To last, to be great, you have to understand how to rest. Not just rest, but relax, too, and have fun too. The most surefire way to make yourself more fragile, to cut your career short, is to be undisciplined about rest and recovery. Sleep is an act of character. The night before Floyd Patterson fought Archie Moore, he slept for 11.5 hours. The boxer knocked out the exhausted champion in the 5th round. In the armed forces, they refer to the idea of sleep discipline as something you have to enforce in yourself. In response, he began to monitor the sleep cycles of his crew, moderate their watch duties, and encourage naps. Watching our physical health is an act of character and can enormously help with our ability to perform. We say we're not a morning person, but that is almost certainly because we've been irresponsible or undisciplined evening people. The best way to master the morning is to have mastered it the night before. Just as sleep-trained an infant learns discipline begets sleep, so, too, does discipline beget discipline. What can you endure? Ernest Shackleton's Arctic expedition got stuck in the ice for nearly a year. He and his crew braved hurricane-strength winds in the open ocean in a 20-foot boat. His family motto tells us, fortitude invincimus. By endurance we conquer. Many a great conqueror in the days of horseback were called old iron ass for their ability to stay in the saddle. Toni Morrison was up early, all those tired mornings, sitting in the chair, watching the sun come up. Shackleton refused to abandon his responsibilities until he had brought his people home. FDR was paralyzed from the waist down, and refused to let his body decide who was in charge. Churchill wrote about FDR's 7-year recovery before World War II. We are given a million opportunities to stop, and a million reasons why that's okay, but we can't. Beyond the body. Those who think that they can live a high spiritual life whose bodies are filled with idleness and luxuries are mistaken. Tolstoy. Temperance in the body affects the mind, and intemperance and excess physically prevent the mind from working as it should. The decisions we make today and always are being recorded, daily, silently and not so silently, in who we are, what we look like or feel. When we speak of temperance and self-discipline, we are referring to a person who has themselves under control. The body is the first step in that journey. Discipline is how we free ourselves. It is the key that unlocks the chains. It's how we save ourselves. Part 2. The inner domain. What man is happy? He who has a healthy body, a resourceful mind, and a docile nature. Thales. David Frum. Temperament is everything. True self-control means moderation in what we do, but also how we think and feel. Millions of years of evolution have combined to give us these gifts. Will we command them as tools? Or let them languish, allowing ourselves to be jerked around like puppets? Elizabeth II was born with no clear path or expectation to power. From the day of her coronation, Elizabeth would reign but not rule. What does the modern British sovereign do? It's hard to say. She can't pass laws, she can't choose who leads the government. In 1947, Queen Elizabeth II said her life would be devoted to the service of the British Empire. She's visited more than 126 nations and traveled more than 1 million nautical miles by sea and air. Out of hundreds of thousands of engagements, she has fallen asleep in public only once. The Queen's daily duties take immense physical discipline. Aides have noted that she is as strong as a yak and can endure long periods of standing. Harold Macmillan, her third Prime Minister, once exclaimed that the Queen had the heart and stomach of a man. The Queen has personified this ideal, keeping an even keel no matter the circumstances. In 1964, she serenely and calmly endured a violent anti-monarchy riot in Quebec. In 1981, she was riding on horseback when a gunman rushed her and fired 6 shots. Temperament may be less charismatic, but it survives. From her teens, she was advised by Churchill, and tutored twice per week for 6 years in law. Discipline is a far rarer commodity at the top than brilliance. She doesn't blurt out what she thinks ought to be done. Elizabeth II has been a lifelong student of human behavior. She is not empowered to have political opinions yet she is strong enough to refrain from expressing them. Her job has been to preserve her institution while adapting it to a rapidly changing future. Change has been the largest and most continual challenge of her life. Self-discipline is not keeping things exactly as they are with an iron grip. Nor would much discipline be required in a world that always stayed the same. Temperance is also the ability to adjust, to find the opportunity to grow and improve in any situation. An ordinary person could get away with a little rhetorical flourish, but you aren't a queen if you're ordinary. You have to be approachable at the same time as being above reproach. Imagine being head of state and head of church, modern and timeless. The Queen is said to be surprisingly very easy to talk to, very quick to put others at ease. Although the Queen holds herself to high standards, she is remarkably tolerant of breaches of protocol. She has received her share of criticism, too, as all public people must expect to endure. The Queen has effectively and tirelessly served as head of state for roughly 1/6 of the Earth's surface. She's done so without personal corruption scandals, affairs or major missteps. Some note that even her accent has slowly shifted, becoming less pronounced and aristocratic over time. Greatness is not just what one does, but what one refuses to do, the Queen said. Her self-command made her a ruler her people could be proud of. It saved her from herself, from the temptations of power, sure. And it helped her outlast not just tyrants but whole forms of tyranny itself. Look at everything like this. He was trying to stop himself from rushing to judgment or losing control of his emotions. That calmness of manner and of conduct distinguished him through life, said one friend of Washington's. In between every stimulus and its response, there is space. Will we use it to think, examine, wait for more information? Or will we give in to first impressions, harmful instincts, and old patterns? Washington wasn't naturally stoic, he made himself this way. A leader can't make decisions on impulse. They must lead from somewhere more rational, more controlled than that. Everything must be met with a measured and mellow eye. The answer determines what you'll be able to do and, more important, who you will be. Keep the main thing the main thing. He ran the Tuskegee Institute, which he founded. He lobbied legislators, gave lectures, led fundraising campaigns, and published 5 books. It wasn't just endurance and hustle, it was also the discipline to say no. It is impossible to be committed to anything without discipline to say no. Everything we say yes to means saying no to something else. To rebuff one opportunity means to cultivate another. Every no can also be a yes to what really matters, and this is the key to happiness. To try to do everything is to ensure you'll achieve nothing. Be polite when you can, but own it. And because it's your life, seize it. By seizing it, you become powerful. Mattis, notoriously private and duty-bound, was not interested in doing the rounds of Sunday morning talk shows. Begged, prodded, bothered, and then criticized by administration officials for not helping them get messages out. If you call me again, I'm going to send you to Afghanistan, he said. Focus, focus, focus. In a world of distraction, focusing is a superpower. The Stoics tell us that we must learn how to focus in every moment like a Roman. We have to narrow our gaze to what matters and commit to it. To commit is to truly, fully, completely commit. Beethoven was known for profound periods of focus on a single piece of music. As his hearing declined, it went unnoticed by many of his closest friends. In yogic tradition, this is called ekagrata, intense focus on one singular point. Goethe and Beethoven were similar in this ability. Epictetus reminds us that when you say, "I'll be shameless, immature, and base," what you're really saying is, "Others will have the power to distress me. It's worth concentrating on today. It's worth focusing on now," writes Beethoven. Wait for this sweet fruit. Joyce Carol Oates is one of the most prolific and dedicated writers of her generation. Authors' manuscripts are held in drawer, sometimes for a year or more, before being published. Waiting for the right moment, whether one is a writer or politician, is an agonizing thing. Patience, as Thomas Edison illustrated, is a primary ingredient of genius. Even fits of inspiration or flashes of brilliance are worthless without the patience to polish, refine, and ultimately release. The discipline of patience prevents us from acting on insufficient information or picking the wrong option. It is impossible for people to do all things perfectly. But the patient person is more protected and resilient. Patience serves as protection against wrongs as clothes do against cold. Leonardo da Vinci. Buckle up and wait. That's what it takes. Perfectionism is a vice. In 1931, Martha Graham was hopelessly bogged down in a dance series she had choreographed. A notorious perfectionist, she despaired of ever completing the dance. Steve Jobs got stuck releasing the Macintosh before he was fired from Apple. Ralph Ellison produced 40 drafts of a short statement about one of his own books. An obsession with getting it perfect misses the forest for the trees, because ultimately the biggest miss of all is failing to get your shot off. What you don't ship, what you're too afraid or strict to release, to try, is, by definition, a failure. If you have trouble with finishing, if you know you can fall prey to perfectionism, then do you have the self-discipline to find partners who can cut you off and balance you out? This is why finishing is itself an achievement, an act of monumental discipline that must happen. Do the hard thing first. Van Jones, Toni Morrison's mornings weren't for catching up on the news or folding laundry. She used them to write, seizing the day while others were still sleeping. Jones, by taking care of, difficult, business first, Morrison took care of herself. To procrastinate is to be entitled. It assumes there will be a later. The graveyard of lost potential is filled with people who just needed to do something else first. The time to do it is now. To push it until later is a loser's game. Can you get back up? He was knocked out in the 3rd round, it was all his fault. In June 1960, Floyd Patterson knocked out Ingemar Johansson midway through the 5th round. Patterson was the first ever, and only one of 4 since, to regain a heavyweight title. He willed himself to watch the film of his ignominious defeat, learning from each tortuous viewing. Even the most cheerful and self-disciplined of us will stumble under the weight of our circumstances or the consequences of our behavior. Viktor Frankl said yes to life, to a second try, to getting back in the ring, to clawing his way back to happiness with purpose. The battle against pain. Kennedy's medical history shows the lengths he was willing to go for relief. He took corticosteroids, procaine, testosterone, phenobarbital, penicillin, amphetamines, and anything else he could get his hands on. Inevitably, the medications took their toll on Kennedy. Kennedy's doctor found that the president could not do a single sit-up. With stretching and breathing exercises, weights, and calisthenics, Kennedy regained much of his mobility. Today, people, in considerably less pain, have popularized the phrase doing the work to describe their use of psychedelic drugs. Kennedy, the work is getting through life sober. Go on a trip? Go to therapy. Struggle with it. Heal a little bit each day, get a little better each day. John Paul II said temperance is about avoiding the impulse to deprive ourselves of consciousness by the use of drugs. Frieda, pain can be an indicator, a warning light, a reminder to slow down or make a change. Greg Popovich was willing to take the fine for resting his players. For too long, Kennedy wasn't interested in fixing what was wrong, only in finding a way to continue. The battle against pleasure. To Epicurus, pleasure was not gluttony, it was not mindlessly giving the body whatever it ached for. We are self-disciplined because we want to avoid a hellish existence, right? The Stoics said that this was a perfect metaphor for everything we do. Remember to conduct yourself in life as if at a banquet, Epictetus said. If you're stuffed and uncomfortable afterward, or you don't even remember what happened the night before, was it that great? Nobody who has given themselves over to excess is having a good time. Temperance, C.S. Lewis reminds us, is about going to the right length and no further. Discipline is not a punishment, it's a way to avoid punishment. Never approaching, let alone passing, the point of regret while still enjoying things that are fun. Recognizing that your choices have put you in a dangerous fog, as Kennedy couldn't do. Fight the provocation. Arthur Ashe Sr. was working as a driver for William Thalheimer, a wealthy Jewish man in the 1950s. Arthur Ashe Jr. says his father's experience inspired him to be pragmatic, patient and self-contained. He says his dad didn't care what people said about him or did to him, he cared about his family. Bob Greene, when we are offended, when we fight, we are complicit. We have traded self-control for self-indulgence, he writes. Greene, as wrong as they are, as annoying as it is, it takes two for a real conflict to happen. Arthur Ashe Jr. learned self-control from his father, who channeled the provocations of life productively on the tennis court. Think of what Ginsburg and Ashe Sr. and Thalheimer had to endure. We don't have to turn the buzzing gnat into a national referendum. Beware this madness. Castle's famous big balls dance cost his team the chance to advance to the conference finals. Sex drives us crazy, blinds us away, overrides our judgment, makes us do shameful things. Frieda, almost every regret, every mistake, every embarrassing moment is the result of someone losing control of their emotions. She says passions are dangerous and can lead us astray if we let them hijack our minds or bodies. If you cannot rein in your impulses now, how will you do when you aspire to power? John Wooden tried to keep the passion on his team to a minimum. I wanted them bristling with intensity, finely focused, and in control of themselves, he said. We can have passion, but no one can afford to be a slave to it. When you see someone about to give themselves over to a fit of passion, see if you can help redirect that energy. Just like an addict looks for the warning signs of a craving, we must look for insertion points for our self-discipline before we get carried away. Silence is strength. Laconic style is part and parcel of the culture of self-discipline of the Spartans. They never said more than was necessary, never overshared or bloviated. With power comes license to say whatever you want, whenever you want, to whomever you want. Cato chose to speak only when he was certain his words weren't better left unsaid. Just because there is a pause doesn't mean you have to fill it. Better to be thought foolish or simple than to prove that you don't actually have anything to say. When you talk, it should matter. Regret what you didn't say, not the other way around. Free speech is a right, not an obligation. Zeno would remind his students, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Respect that ratio properly. Let your actions do the talking. Hold your fire. How badly Winston Churchill must have wanted to attack France in World War II. Millions of lives hung in the balance, untold destruction too. And yet, he gathered up the quiet fortitude to deny an ally what must have felt like their last and only hope. In 1942 and 1943, pressure built for an Allied landing in Europe, opening the so-called Second Front against the Germans. Churchill held off the forceful entreaties from his allies for nearly 2 full years. With intense focus and remarkable self-discipline, he had made the moment right. In business and war, we often only get one moment, one opportunity. Rest early in the season as the Spurs did, so you can peak at the exact right moment. Wait for the perfect job for your talents as you turn down the promotion or hold out in contract negotiations. Temper your ambition. In 1791, a young Napoleon entered an essay contest with the hopes of winning its 1,200 franc prize. The essay took him 6 months to write, and he did not win. Talleyrand, his foreign minister, dug up the essay in the archives and gave it to Napoleon as a gift. Alexander the Great was a cautionary tale for unfettered ambition. Like Napoleon, he waged wars of offense and aggression entirely for himself. This was a pathological need to achieve, for which the consequences were ultimately borne by everyone else. They lusted for control over millions, because they lacked control over themselves. Did Napoleon's accomplishments make him happy? Power and wealth didn't even make him secure. Like all elements of self-discipline, it's about balance. We must have a sense of self and worth that can check our ceaseless ambition before it overleaps itself. Money is a dangerous tool. Babe Ruth made more money as an athlete than a person could have reasonably spent in a lifetime. His baseball salary earned him more than the President of the United States. He didn't seem to think it would ever run out. He'd buy anything and everything, one manager said. When your choices turn you into someone who has to worry about money, then you are not rich no matter how much you make. Thankfully, Churchill was a vital and energetic man, but how much of this vitality was wasted? And even if he was lucky enough to skate by, his son was not nearly so lucky. Paul Waldman, F. Scott Fitzgerald wore himself out in similar fashion. He says Cato's restraint can just as easily be taken to excess as it perhaps even was by Cato. It's irresponsible to be penny-wise and pound-foolish, he says, to grind your life into dust trying to save pennies. Money isn't good or bad. It is a tool. Like any powerful tools, money also has its dangers and must be wielded safely and consciously. You're always going to be subject to the necessity of self-discipline. Or at least you'll never be immune from the consequence of ignoring it. To have so much money you don't have to care about anyone or anything? That's not virtue, it's childishness. Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth were both in the 0.001%. Queen Elizabeth and King George IV inherited the same priceless jewels and fortune. Get better every day. If you think you have room to grow, you do and you will. Tom Brady is obsessed with getting a little bit faster at releasing the football. The secret to Gehrig's incredible trajectory wasn't just his commitment, it was that he never made the same mistake twice. Green, our desire to keep improving keeps us from plateauing and drives us forward. We reach heights we'd never have been able to see otherwise, he says. How much progress could you make if you made just a little each day over the course of an entire life? A focus on progress lets us look ourselves in the mirror with pride and ignore all the commotion in the background. It's beautiful irony, you're never content with your progress and yet, you're always content. Share the load. In 1956, Harry Belafonte called Coretta Scott King to check on her and see if she needed any help at home. Woe is the person who wears themselves out on trivial matters and then, when the big moments come, is out of energy. What makes this so tricky to identify, let alone to manage, is that it often comes from a good place, David Frum writes. Author and poet Ray Belafonte argues that we all have legacy tasks that should be reassigned. By compelling Martin Luther King Jr. to delegate, he was giving him more time to do essential work. Every minute he and Coretta didn't have to spend on chores at home was time well spent. I often reflect that I am forever giving, never pausing to take in. I feel urgently the need for even an hour of time to get away, to withdraw, to refuel. If I had the luxury of an entire week, I would spend it meditating and reading. Respect time. When we kill time, we are killing ourselves. We have to learn how to use time or else it will use us up. Once lost, it cannot be recovered. It is also an incredibly powerful force, as anyone who has watched small amounts of interest applied over a long enough period can attest. Time is a gift, and what we give it to matters. That is why we do our work promptly. It's why we keep our desk clean so we don't waste time looking for stuff. W. H. Auden said that the surest way to discipline passion is to discipline time. You missed opportunities to get better, miss opportunities to make progress. You disrespected other people, who had to wait, and disrespected your cause, which deprived you of your presence, but the silver lining is that life has given you a second chance, at least now. Put up boundaries. Bob Greene, in a world of instant gratification, we don't much respect people who establish and maintain boundaries. He says Queen Elizabeth is respected for keeping her personal life private, and for respecting other people's space. This kind of discipline is all too rare these days. Boundaries are about drawing some lines around yourself. Healthy boundaries mean being able to say no and push back when others put too much on your plate. You can't do your best work if you're constantly micromanaging everyone else's. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for. Energy vampires are people who suck others dry with their neediness, selfishness, dysfunction, and drama. You must be strong enough to keep them at arm's distance. This is why we clean up our desk, why we ignore provocations, and why we don't speak every thought that pops into our head. Most happy people don't need you to know how happy they are. Strongest people are self-contained. They keep themselves in check. Treat everyone else's with as much respect as you'd want for your own. Be the adult in a world of emotional children. Do your best. Jimmy Carter interviewed with Admiral Hyman Rickover for a spot in the Navy's nuclear submarine program. Rickover, who created the world's first nuclear navy, asked Carter why he didn't do his best. It was a question that would inspire and challenge him in many ways for the rest of his life. Carter declared energy and climate change the moral equivalent to war. Despite his efforts and his sincerity, Carter fell short. Rickover, as long as a man is trying as hard as he can to do what he thinks to be right, he is a success, regardless of the outcome. Ellison was a student at the Tuskegee Institute when his piano teacher Hazel Harrison gave him the gift of her time and energy. You must always play your best, she had told him, even if it's only in the waiting room at Shaw Station. Beyond the temperament. Rarely does a person who competes with his head as well as his body come out second. Pete Carril. If we are smart, brilliant, successful or powerful, we have to be more in command of ourselves. We have to consciously, considerately, constantly check in, check ourselves, check our impulses. Self-discipline is not just our destiny, it is our obligation. Part 3. The Magisterial. When we rule ourselves, we have the responsibilities of sovereigns, not of subjects. Theodore Roosevelt. The magisterial is someone who master their mind and spirit in all forms. They are able to do so in public life, as a doer, contributor to society. This is the greatness we seek, this is where the body, mind, and spirit come together. Antoninus Pius, the Roman emperor, was a master class in temperance. Not once in his reign was Antoninus responsible for shedding a drop of blood, foreign or domestic. His gentleness and devotion to his country earned him the magnificent cognomen Antoninus Pius. She says the relationship between Antoninus and Marcus was one of self-control and self-discipline. He says Antoninus took good care of himself and was not a hypochondriac or obsessed with his appearance. Antoninus showed Marcus that it was possible for a man of great power to live an ordinary life. He knew when to push and when to back off. Antoninus tolerated criticism because it made him better, even if it meant admitting error. Hadrian stabbed a secretary with a pen for making a mistake. Antoninus was the perfect combination of a person who had gravity without airs. Hadrian had taken long state tours through the provinces of the empire. Antoninus declined. No matter how humbling and unassuming he tried to be, the baggage train of a sovereign was an imposition. Being head of state weighs on a person. He let the Roman people know his was not fair-weather temperance but marrow deep self-control. What stands in the way becomes the way, he wrote. When Tiberius became emperor in AD 14, he installed himself in an island pleasure palace on Capri. Nero, free of his mother's influence, called for his lyre and styled himself Rome's most talented artist. Marcus Aurelius wept when he was told he would become king. Renan, Marcus Aurelius's valet, Antoninus, was a hero to him. He earned that worship not in one brave moment on the battlefield, but through his extraordinary, ordinary discipline. Renan, like courage, it is contagious, and Marcus caught it and became who he was. A Stoic master had warned a previous emperor to dispatch any other male heirs, saying one cannot have too many Caesars. Lucius Verus was not known to have ever picked up a philosophy book. He found a way to work with flawed people, putting them to service for the good of the empire. Despite his wealth and power, Marcus Aurelius lived humbly. He spent most of his reign not in glamorous palaces of marble but in the simple tent of a soldier. Despite his busy, ceaseless life, he found stillness inside it, says historian Robin Waterfield. Marcus Aurelius kept and was kept by this beautiful motto: unrestrained moderation. It was the pride of Marcus's life that he not only didn't need to ask anyone for favors but that any time anyone asked him for something, he could be generous. Free to Gita's, Marcus Aurelius knew that character is something that needs to be constantly worked on. He maintained his lifelong study of philosophy, humbly gathering up his tablets and going to school. Just as the example of Antoninus helped mold Marcus, so, too, can the lives of these two men mold us. Tolerant with others. Strict with yourself. Cato the Younger was just as strict as his great-grandfather. Cato was humble enough in his own temperance to remember that it's called self-discipline for a reason. Ben Franklin would put forth an even better rule: search others for their virtues, thyself for thy vices. In 1996, the New Jersey Nets tried to draft a young future superstar named Kobe Bryant. Kobe struggled with the idea that his teammates couldn't all be Kobe's. A moment of cheapness cost the Nets a shot at one of the greatest basketball players in history. In the run-up to the Gulf War, Colin Powell kept the fact that he was sleeping in his office a secret from his staff. From Antoninus, Marcus Aurelius learned that trying to escape our own faults is hard enough work to keep us busy for a lifetime. Marcus Aurelius used his stepbrother Lucius Verus' weaknesses to improve himself. The journey we are on here is one of self-actualization. We leave other people's mistakes to their makers. We don't try to make everyone like us. It is our place to cheer them on and accept them. Make others better. Cato the Younger, in everything he did, tried to live up to the legacy of his Stoic great-grandfather. Seneca, the path that a great man follows becomes a guide to the world. The self-disciplined don't berate, don't ask for anything, just do their job. They don't shame either, except perhaps subtly by their own actions. You don't have to be Catos, but you can be a positive force in your community. We can show our children, our neighbors, our colleagues, our employees what good choices look like. What we accomplish can make things possible for others. Our discipline can be contagious. Grace under pressure. The Queen has been calm and controlled as her life was threatened. After the 7/7 terrorist attack in 2005, she said it was a statement of character. Napoleon may have been an ambitious megalomaniac, but no one could deny his poise on the battlefield. The samurai Musashi's genius was his ability to disrupt the poise of his opponents. Grace under pressure looks beautiful, but it is a function of magisterial self-control and will. There is no leader, artist, or parent who has made it their whole lives without high-pressure situations. Pastor Rick Warren, his poise could not fail him, lest he fail his children. Warren says that temperance is more than mild or calm in stressful situations. He says it's holding back the most natural and understandable and forgivable feelings in the world, taking it personally. Carry the load for others. Brigadier General Jim Mattis chose to take over the unpleasant duties of an ordinary soldier. The privilege of command is command, Mattis once told a lieutenant he'd caught shirking. The best commanders take the smaller tent and pass their extra provisions on to their troops. When Antoninus took the throne, he reminded his wife that they would now have to be more generous. For every Marcus Aurelius who sells the palace furnishings during a plague, there are senators who head for warmer weather. The leader shows up first and leaves last. You're the one who has to show you really mean it. The more you've done, the higher the standard you must hold yourself to. To lead, you have to bleed. That's the privilege of command. Be kind to yourself. The Stoic philosopher Cleanthes stopped a man berating himself for some failure. He told the man, "Remember, you're not talking to a bad man. No one is perfect. Mistakes are bound to happen. Celebrate behaving like a human and fully embrace imperfectly." With a friend, we are able to remain calm and reassure. We're able to be a resource for them, pull them out of the depths and get them back on the road to success. It is an act of self-discipline to be kind to the self. The power of giving power away. He was inspired by Cincinnatus, a Roman statesman who gave up power after saving his county. Willingly giving away or sharing the force that is supposed to corrupt absolutely? It is temperance embodied. He preferred lackeys and young women he could have power over empowering others. Washington understood that concentrated power was dangerous and that leadership was a burden best widely distributed. After World War II, Winston Churchill was offered a dukedom by Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. Turn the other cheek. In 1962, Martin Luther King Jr. was savagely beaten by a white man in Birmingham, Alabama. He turned to face his assailant and dropped his hands like a newborn baby, to receive blows. King's actions were the ultimate demonstration of the principles of nonviolence and Christian love. In 1952, Sandra Day O'Connor took a lawfully wedded vow to marry her husband. In 1990, she would bring him to work with her each day so he would not be lonely. She would ultimately give up her dream job to take care of him, even as her beloved husband had dementia.